I've lived 1,000 lives. I've piloted 1,000 souls. I've killed and fought and died just for another role.
Hello, everybody. I mean, yar, me hearties. I have orchestrated a mutiny and kicked Kimmy off of her own ship. This be my crew now. Hi. I know this is a little bit weird, but welcome to Session 30, Episode 20 of the Happy Jacks RPG Podcast. Today, your hosts are Nick,
And Riley.
and I believe we may have a wild special guest appearing later, but we'll keep our fingers crossed.
We don't know
won't
for sure, in theory.
There was some communication things that happened. In any case, in today's episode, Mike F. from New York shares his system for categorizing TTRPGs. Zed from the UK asks about balancing crime and punishment so everyone has fun. Jolene shares her strategies for running a mass one-shot and asks our thoughts on the subject. If you'd like to contribute a question or story to the show, email us at happyjacks.rpg@gmail.com. Again, that's happyjacks@gmail.com. As if you don't know this because you're either watching or listening.
Yeah, you probably
But in
sent
any
one of these
case,
emails in.
if this is your first episode, whoo! Announcements. Strategicon is coming. Bow, 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 bow. Labor Day weekend, September 2nd through the 4th. Some of us are going to be running games. Kimmy, Jason, and Chris Gray. It's good to know that Jason's running a game, so I won't anticipate being here for Castaways on that Saturday. But we do invite you to come on down to Strategicon if it is at all convenient for you. There will not be a live show at the con. We are still going through the travel podcast kit and see what's working and what needs to be replaced and what needs to be updated. But hopefully by the next con, we will have a live show. The advice show will happen as normal on Friday, Friday, September 2nd. Boy, I'm already I'm winded, but we got to get through this first email.
Yeah, well, I'll take over for you because it's quite a grog to get a grog.
Slog.
Yeah, grog is a drink. Yeah.
Right. Well, it fits in
yeah.
just.
I wish I would have
just
brought a
right.
fire hat. I have a bunch of stuff. It's fine. I like to cosplay. Yeah, I'll go for this one, and this is a long one, so we'll probably be taking turns and taking some stops along the way. But here we go. Mailbag 1. This comes to us from Mike F. from New York. Hello, Kimmy and the crew. This is some commentary on the discussion from Season 30, Episode 16, about what makes a traditional RPG. I think what makes an RPG traditional is a combination of the roles of the people playing the game, the nature of the rules themselves, and the player's expectations regarding the game rules. I am going to restrict this commentary lies to tabletop RPG, LARPs, and LAOGS's live-action online games, and have their own set. Oh, I see. I missed a period. I'm going to restrict this commentary to tabletop RPGs because LARPs and LAOGSs have their own set of traditions and game design movements, and I'm not well versed in live action play. It's never been my cup of tea. I thought you were from New York and not the UK. We got a lot of weird emails coming in. All right, sorry, that was a dumb joke. I am also going to touch on GNS game theory, which was an attempt in the mid-aughts to classify RPGs on 3 axes. Gamist, where the rules provide tools that exist outside of the game world for the players to use, such as metacurrencies, character movement rules, or abstract victory conditions. Narrativist, where the rules provide a framework or mechanics to tell a compelling story, and simulationist, where the rules seek to simulate a game world and provide structural consistency to the game, both in-game from the characters' perspectives and in the metagame from the player's perspective. I could talk for hours about GNS theory, its usefulness, its limitations, and why it's fallen out of favor, but that's a subject for another time. Looking at the TTRPG scene today, I see that there are 4 distinct categories of games. These are broad categories and the boundaries are fuzzy. There are games that straddle categories or don't fit neatly into any of them. This also isn't the only model you could use to categorize games. I think reasonable people can disagree on the specifics. I like that that's in there. I like the idea that otherwise I'm like, no, this is the only way to categorize them, and I'm writing to tell you that if you don't do this, you're wrong.
You're wrong.
Yeah.
You cannot play RPGs if you don't have strict categorization records.
My 4 categories are traditional RPGs, the old school Renaissance, narrative-focused RPGs, story games, and lyric games. These categories diverged from each other at different points over the past 50 years of the hobby, and then the Fire Nation attacked. So, Nick, do you want to keep going, or do you have any commentary on what has been said so far?
I think it's interesting. I always talk about the GNS theory when I'm talking to people and describing a game in terms of gamist versus simulationist, just to kind of have some sort of spectrum that can be helpful with those sorts of things. Like when people complain how unrealistic falling damage is, or
Yeah.
unrealistic that you can run so far in 6 seconds or whatever, you can go, well,
Yeah.
we're not trying to perfectly mimic life. If you want to do that, go outside and do that.
Yeah, I had that exact discussion today online. We were talking about the new Unearthed Arcana rules that are being discussed for D&D, and how they're actually possibly going to codify that even on skill checks, natural 1s and 20s are successes or failures.
Right.
And I had somebody who's a friend of mine talking to me on Twitter about it, saying how, like, he doesn't think they should do it that way because there are some things that you just can't succeed on no matter what. And I'm kind of in the mindset of like, I just don't think you should roll dice then. I think if you cannot succeed, this is mathematically impossible for you to succeed.
Right.
Don't make a player roll dice. And he was responding like, well, there's some things in reality that you just can't do no matter how hard you try. And I'm like, but I'm not here to live in reality. I'm here to play a game. So
Right.
if the game rules say that I can't do this thing, let's just move on and do something different or find a different route for it. So,
Yeah, I mean, I can see both parts of that. Like on the one hand, I play these games because I want to be, awesome and a superhero and do all of these sorts of
Yeah.
really cool things. On the other hand, I've never liked that, like, the giant hulking barbarian rolls a 1 on their ability to open up the
Yeah.
portcullis, and then you've got the wizard goes, well, I'll give it a shot, and rolls that 20 and
Yeah.
hoists it up, and you're just like, no, in the reality of this world, that could not happen.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the difference is whether you let the person, like, if you have a wizard who has no proficiency in strength things, you're like, come on, you're not gonna be able to do this thing, or what is your way of doing it besides physically doing
Right.
it? Like
Yeah, I'm okay
or-
with that.
yeah.
Like, give a little bit of, all right, sell me.
yeah, like it could be like
Convince me.
a good example of that exact scenario is the barbarian shook it and like something popped loose, but it was like and then the wizard did it, and it's like a garage door where like the latch is going, and now when he does it, it rolls right up. But it's like the joke. Then that's the narrative explanation, is that it wasn't that it was the wizard was stronger than the barbarian. It's that the barbarian did something, didn't pop it open, but got it loosened up. Like,
Right.
I opened that lid for you.
Or the wizard says, yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go get this lever and this
Yeah.
rock, and I'm just going to lever that thing open.
Yeah,
And you go like,
exactly.
okay, physics, that's good.
Yeah. So let's get into Mike's first theory here, the first designation that Mike has. And again, the opinions of Mike do not reflect the opinions of Happy Jack RPGs or RPG Studios or RPGs. All right. Traditional RPGs. Most RPGs fall under this category. In traditional games, there is a clear distinction between the GM and the players. Players each play their own individual characters who are the protagonists of the game, and the GM runs the world and plays all the other non-player characters. Trad games tend to be simulationist. Their game mechanics are intended to be neutral and are usually universal to both player and GM run characters. The rules are often analogous to the laws of physics for the game world in a similar situation: fighting, falling, jumping, sneaking, and getting hit. The same rules are going to apply regardless of the specific circumstances. Situational modifiers might apply, but the rules for a gunfight are going to be the same regardless of who's shooting. The rules of the game tend to be player-focused. The rules are there for the players to engage with and often set very clear boundaries and or caveats on when a player can use them and what the limitations might be. In other words, in a traditional game, players are generally pretty sure about how the rules are going to cover the situation they're in and what game mechanics they can use to interact with the challenges the GM presents to them. Most trad games tend to have a good amount of rules, depth, and or complexity. Crunch, as they say, although I hate that term. This gives GMs and players the opportunity to gain system mastery for the game, where they have learned enough about the rules and how they interact so they can usually pick optimal solutions to the problem at hand. As I said, most contemporary RPGs fall into this category, such as D&D 3e, 4e, 5e, GURPS, Hero System Champions, Call of Cthulhu, Amber Diceless Role-Playing, Traveler, The Dark Eye, Warhammer, Fantasy Role-Playing, 2D20 System, Year Zero Engine, Cypher System, AGE, Adventure Game Engine, Savage Worlds, Genesis, and a whole lot of others.
So first of all, you're wrong. at least on these some of these specifics.
Yeah.
Amber Diceless role-playing game in no way falls under this simulationist idea, since it's literally a magical world where you're walking through dimensions, and the way that things are resolved are on a bid system that happened on the session 0. So some person is the strongest of your group and always wins strength contests if that's the only thing that's compared to it. So that does not belong in there. Savage Worlds does not belong in there either, in my opinion, simply because the explosion mechanic that is inherent in those dice means that someone with a slingshot can, bring down a F-16 jet fighter if they just happen to keep rolling on damage.
Or like a
rolling on
wizard
damage.
can open a portcullis that a barbarian couldn't because they just kept rolling dice.
Basically. So I understand what you're saying, and to some extent I agree with. There is a certain interpretation of traditional RPGs that could certainly be an argument for, that they tend to be simulationist, that they tend to be trying to represent real laws of physics and how things work in the world that we understand and inhabit most of the time. And because of that, they do have a lot of rules depth and complexity. But I think that being a traditional RPG is not just those things, because I think there are games that I would classify as traditional RPGs that don't have those, and ones that do that I don't think are traditional, for various reasons. I think that it's, like almost everything, it's kind of on a spectrum.
Yeah. Which, I mean, Mike even admits earlier that saying the boundaries are fuzzy, so he's kind of like these broad strokes. But I agree with you about that, yeah. Okay, let's move on. There's a lot
I'll
here.
take the next
go ahead.
paragraph. You want to just switch off paragraphs? We can do.
I think you know more than I do about like game theory and stuff, so that's why I'm kind of letting you have like more of the color commentary on it. That's
Okay.
why, yeah.
No, I don't know that I know more. I think that I just have louder opinions because because I'm not in the room with this guy, so I can tell him he's wrong all day. And
Which really
don't have
I
to worry
am,
about
which
it.
is really bizarre.
All right, the next category is old school Renaissance, OSR, RPGs. The OSR started in the very early aughts as a reaction to D&D 3E. Some players and GMs didn't like how explicitly codified the rules for most game had become, particularly for D&D 3E. Their argument was that complex rules put too much predictability into the game, and some thought that the complexity too much and some thought that the complexity
I
too
think,
much.
I think it's took too much. Some thought the complexity took too much creativity and responsibility away from the GM.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I will accept that. Too much creativity and or responsibility away from the GM. Like traditional games, OSR games tend to be simulationist. However, their rule sets tend to be very much lighter, relying on the GM to use rulings, not rules. The first wave of OSR games used WotC's and then new open game license to recreate long out of print earlier editions of D&D. Such games were dubbed retro clones. Examples are Swords and Wizardry, a clone of the 1974 original D&D, Labyrinth Lord, a clone of the 1981 Moldvay edition of the D&D Basic Expert Rules. By the way, that was the first RPG that I ever played and
nice.
owned for myself, and the art is amazing, if dated. And Osric, a clone of AD&D 1E. What rules there are in OSR games are dangerous to engage with. Combats are unpredictable and deadly. Social encounters can turn ugly fast. Jumping over a chasm can be instant death. Smart OSR players will always stack the deck in their favor, using out-of-the-box creativity and what's presented in the environment to take any possible advantage they can. Fights are to be avoided when possible. Clever PCs lure monsters into traps and set two groups of enemies to fight each other, or just run away. OSR-style play rewards creativity beyond what's on your character sheet or written in the rulebook. While retro clone games are still around, new SR games have come onto the market in recent years that keep the ethos of rulings, not rules, and the emphasis of player creativity without basing themselves on D&D or earlier RPGs. Examples of neo-OSR games include Morkborg, Into the Odd, Best Left, and Stars Without Number.
Now, I'm not a big OSR person myself, so I'm going to let you have your thoughts on this, because I don't know if you're into this big thing or not, but...
Honestly, no. I'm not into OSR so much, partly because I played through them when they were happening the first time, so I don't feel the need to kind of go back to those items.
Yeah.
I do take some issue with some of the items raised here, in that on the one hand, having GM creativity and player creativity and thinking outside the box, those are all great things that I don't think should be restricted at any game or level of play. And I try to reward that when I run a game, and I try and do creative things with spells and attacks and with the environment when I am a player as well. I think that the real problem with that style that is being described in this sort of OSR style is so much is left up to the GM. And so if you have a good GM, great.
Yeah.
If you have a bad one, it is the fucking worst. I
Yeah.
will just
Like,
say.
a bad GM is bad in any game, but especially a game that has this much power given to that bad GM.
Right. It's
Yeah.
the thing about having more rules and more current games. Yes, it does take a lot more time to get to know them. It does make it feel like you're losing some parts of the creativity of items, but it also sets up a framework that kind of equalizes the power between the GM and the player a little bit.
Yeah.
It's kind of like being part of a union, where you have things to back you up and to make sure that you're not just railroaded. And especially the thing with those styles of games, in my opinion, is that they tend to reward a combative style GM play, where the GM is trying to win over the players,
Yeah.
which is foolish in all ways, because if you're the game master, you have all the power. You could just make it so they die. There's no fun in that for you eventually. It's, I guess bullying like that is fun for a little while, but I hope that we all grow out of that. But it's certainly not fun for the players if the objective is, I'm just going to crush your spirits and that sort of thing. That being said, a lot of people like the idea of having to think outside the box, knowing that there are deadly traps, the literal 10-foot pole pushing on everything in front of them and throwing dust in the air to see if there's laser beams or tripwires or anything like that. That's great. It also tends to take a super long time to do something simple like open a door.
Yeah.
Because you're, all right, I oil the hinges. I'm making sure that they're not, connected to a tripwire. I'm feeling all the door to make sure there's no heat coming off of any part of it. I use this grabber claw from 10 feet away to
You're describing
jiggle
why
the
I don't
knob.
play these games. Like, yeah, I think that I didn't get into D&D until later editions, because when I was younger, the games that got me into role playing were, we'll probably talk about a little bit moving into this next section. But my first game was Vampire and Werewolf. Like, White Wolf was so those are pretty crunchy games too, but they have a lot more story narrative, which is what got me excited about them. But I can't tell you how I'm just too impatient as an ADHD player to sit and like have someone go through every little thing to get through what's like 10 seconds of story. Even when you get into like moments in like 5e D&D, which I quite enjoy, but when there's like a thing where we're doing multiple rounds of combat, and like if for some reason you get paralyzed or you are incapacitated or unable to roll, and like if you have a long combat happening, it can get real dreary after a while, like waiting for stuff to happen. So
Yeah. I had a thought. The thought is gone. Probably wasn't important then.
it may come back up.
Oh, it was just on a personal note. I tend to be a fairly cautious RPG player because I want my character to live.
Yeah, of course.
So one of the things I don't like about this is that I have to be like going on tiptoes and these arbitrary traps that happen that you really had no way of knowing. Some games I have tried to adjust that and just be the guy who presses buttons and opens doors and just goes, screw it, I'll be the first one through because we came here to adventure, right? We're not just gonna stand around here and worry about this pit trap for the next 2 hours.
I intentionally, my last big campaign that I was in, I intentionally made my character a little impatient so that and dealt with damage. Like I almost died multiple times because I was the captain of our crew and I was like, no, we're doing this. And so I would just go right into it. One thing I want to say, and I think it's a good lead in to this next section, is that I push back a lot on this idea that the make or break between story friendly and rules friendly is crunch or no crunch. I don't agree that less crunch is inherently more story friendly, and I think that that's like a pretty commonly held belief in RPGs, especially nowadays. And I get why people say that, but kind of what you said earlier about like not being on rails but having like framework. As a writer, I often find that I do better writing when I'm forced to work within a constraint of something.
Yeah.
And so I do think that like there are ways to be creative and interesting and build fun story within the like restrictions of crunch that in my mind can be as creative as or more creatively fulfilling than working with a more open like rules light system. So I do think that like I don't think like it's wrong to say like yes these games are rules driven, these games are story driven, but I do push back when people are like, oh, this is automatically better storytelling because of the lack of rules. Because sometimes I think having rules helps you. Like when I'm making a background for my character, it's way easier for me to think of a much more like involved and deep background by picking one that's already in the book and going, okay, if I'm starting from this thing, where do I go from there? It's like having a prompt versus like I will always write more with a prompt than if you give me a blank page and tell me, okay, write something. Like, oh no, like
Well, it it helps. Like for improv, you call for a suggestion from the audience to give you a place to start. Otherwise,
yeah, let me yes and something. So yeah, so that gets a good one to go into this next section with. So narrative-focused RPGs. Yes, this is all still the same email. Narrative-focused RPGs, aka story games. These have been around for a while, but really got their due in the Forge era in the early aughts. Unlike both trad and OSR games, narrative-focused games tend not to be concerned with game mechanics that simulate the world itself. The rules are there to help the players tell an interesting and compelling story about the player characters. Most narrative-focused games set hard bounds around the kind of story they're designed to tell and break down or don't work at all when you leave those bounds. These games are a conversation between the GM and the players. Players are usually encouraged to think and make decisions in the metagame, often called the fiction, so as to make interesting things happen in the game. The game mechanics often encourage thinking from the player's perspective rather than that of their character. Most narrative-focused RPGs still have a GM role, but many don't. Some games use the rules themselves to fill the role of a GM, while others explicitly share the responsibilities of a GM among the players in some manner. Most narrative-focused games use a sort of randomizer. That's in the text. That's not me. Use a sort of randomizer like dice or cards, but they aren't so much a resolution mechanic as a means of determining who has narrative control to say what happens next. Early examples of narrative-focused games include Sorcerer, My Life with Master, and Dogs in the Vineyard. Contemporary games include For the Queen, Fiasco, Aegon, Fate, and the Powered by the Apocalypse family of games, and their descendants Forged in the Dark, Belonging and Firebrand's framework. And while many narrative-focused games are rules light, that's not necessarily true. Example, Burning Wheel or Flying Circus. So I definitely agree with the point that a lot of times these games are designed to tell a specific kind of story, and if you're not telling that story, then it kind of does fall apart a little bit. But I also think Powered by Apocalypse is a good example of how that's not necessarily true, because yes, if you're playing a specific game using that system, it's going to be hard to go outside of that game's narrative, but the fact that those exact same rules can be used for a variety of stories does kind of imply like, okay, yes, like this particular campaign might be hard to move outside of that box, but the rules as they're created are actually pretty malleable.
Right. I also I tend to disagree with this a little bit in that where was the part that I was looking at? I don't believe that narrative-focused games like that encourage you to make decisions on a meta level as opposed to make decisions for your character. I think that, sure, that happens, but that happens in all games. At every point, someone's going to be, on some level, making decisions that they are making rather than what their character are making. But I think narrative games actually more often fall under the auspice of my character and not what I want to do. And sometimes it leads to interesting things. In the game that I'm in right now, Cast-Offs, there was a little bit of contention between Pooja's character, Lucky, who'd been trying to introduce my character, Sal, to something that Sal really liked to eat. For those of you who aren't watching, Sal is an 8-foot animated figurehead from a ship. and so doesn't really have a need to eat and didn't really see the point. And so after trying that for a while, couldn't come up with anything, and then an NPC gave Sal some wood stain or wood polish, and that was kind of slightly psychoactive for Sal, and they were really into it and thought it was really good. And
Yeah.
Lucky felt very betrayed because of that. And when during the conversation, I wanted Sal to apologize and try and smooth it over and everything. But what came out of my mouth was "I'm sorry you feel that way" sort of statement.
Yeah.
And I stopped and was like, oh God, I hate this, but this is what Sal thinks and this is what Sal's going to do.
Yeah.
And Sal just kept digging themselves deeper in this, celebrity apology, we'll call it.
Yeah. I think that line honestly twinged my ear as well as I was reading it, but where I will give Mike credit for what I think Mike's trying to say there is that, like, there are times, and like I remember I played a game of, using Powered by Apocalypse as an example, I played a game of what's it called?
Monster Hearts?
Yeah, Monster Hearts at a con, and at the beginning of the game, we were like, you're in a classroom, someone's sitting in front of you, who is that person? And then you like describe who that person is, and then like as players, we ended up describing the entire classroom, like, well, why is this person mad at Steven's character? And then I'm like, well, because they cheated on each other or whatever. So like that's, I think, where maybe it's saying you're getting more into like the player mindset as opposed to your character's point of view of the thing. I think you can do it both ways. I think you could play it as, what does your character think about that? Like I think that's how Decima works a lot with, like, when you get to character relationships. But even Decima, like when you're building the world, I think like that is more like your outside the game brain looking into the world and creating the world together. So I can give it that, and I think that might be true about some games in this list. Like for the Queen especially, I feel like you're building a story based on the deck of cards.
Absolutely.
As opposed to, I think that Powered by Apocalypse, I think like you're giving players world building powers, but then you also still push them back into character. So I guess that might fall into like that kind of like gray area that was mentioned earlier between, like, it depends on what part of the game you're currently playing.
Yeah, absolutely.
But like even people who are listening currently to Hexbreakers will notice that there are times where Emily asks us, what's a fact about this part of the world? Like, what do people think? A lot of times she'll do it in the guise of like, what does your character think of that, or what has your character heard? But not always. So that's like that's kind of, I think these kind of games maybe have a little more space for that kind of play. Like, I run a Doctor Who RPG podcast, and built into the mechanic of the game is everybody has story points, and when you spend story points, you get like very limited GM powers, and you're able to like influence the story that way. Now, granted, usually you spend the story points in a way that's going to directly benefit or affect your character, but you are still taking it outside of things your character is choosing to do and kind of deciding, as a player, this is what's happening in the world that allows my character to do this thing.
Right. I do agree with the part that about I do agree with the part that these games are often designed to play a certain style of game, and that they don't necessarily translate over. 10 Candles isn't on this list, but that's also very much like you couldn't use 10 Candles to play a happy story. It's just not
very
available.
Strange if it wouldn't be very fun if you did.
Right. The Forged in the Dark stuff, the like Blades in the Dark, again, you have to be telling a story about being inside this city that is the last city and being surrounded by electrical ghosts and whatnot, and running a crew. You can't use that to tell the story of, like, it'd be really rough to use that to do a coming of age story, for instance, or you
could do it, but you have to do a coming of age story in that setting.
Yeah, and you'd have to make some certain concessions, I think, because it's a brutal style game, and you'd kind of have to tinker with it a little bit. So yes, again, narrative focused RPGs do tend to have a certain narrative that they want you to tell. They are a little bit guided.
Yeah, you're pretty stuck in, like, even if you are playing, like I mentioned how Powered by Apocalypse's overall rules can be used to play different kinds of narratives, but once you've picked a PBTA game, your playbooks are pretty much set for the kind of game you're telling. And it's like I did a a bonus episode. My friend has a podcast about romance like stories,
Mhm.
and we played Warmer in the Winter, which is like a holiday romance style RPG, like designed to be like a Hallmark movie basically. That would be a really hard system to be playing if suddenly zombies came in, because not unlike Monster Hearts, where Monster Hearts, most of your moves are about turning each other on and having like social interactions, not a whole lot of fighting going on with it, a little bit but not a lot. Warmer Winter has even less, and Warmer Winter's rules are all about like having like heartstrings on somebody and how you can manipulate them. It'll be really tough if suddenly you're playing like an action heavy game. So
Although I do think kind of a game about relationships and having influence on people in a world that happened to be in like a zombie apocalypse would be really
yeah.
interesting.
like your Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, but like you're playing it with, you're still playing the intrigue and the relationships, and the
Exactly.
zombies just happen to be there. I've always wanted to write a movie about that, by the way, but I'm not good enough at writing just people talking. Like I need, yeah. I love the idea of like, this just is a world full of zombies, but now we're trying to, it's almost like Shaun of the Dead with just all the like friendship, relationship stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'd be pretty neat.
All right. You want to hop into lyric games?
I do. I'm actually interested because I'm not sure what this topic is going to mean. Lyric games. This is the newest movement on the scene, and I don't have a lot of first-hand experience with them. Like narrative-focused games, lyric games tell a very specific kind of story, or possibly just a single story. Unlike a narrative-focused game, lyric games are primarily about evoking emotions in the players. Oh, so this might be where 10 Candles comes in.
I don't think our guest is going to make it based on the message we just got, just so you know.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, folks, this is not a very successful mutiny. I only have one other mutineer. So
Hey, we're still here.
That's
we
true.
Locked this place down.
that's true. That's
by
true.
locking it down, I mean it's open and anyone can walk in. We've left it open for somebody to come in if they wanted to.
Let me go. Or possibly just single story. Unlike the narrative-focused games, lyric games are primarily about evoking emotion in the players and to make them think about how the fictional situation presented in the game relates to the real world and to look at it from a new perspective. One thing I find fascinating about lyric games is that while they are playable as a game, the author often never really intended the game to be played. Reading the game and thinking about how the game would play out is often enough to evoke the intended emotions and think about the world differently. As I said in my intro, some games straddle the line or don't fit the model. I'll just take part of this here. Actually, no, we should probably pause and talk about lyric games for a minute.
Yeah.
Actually, I am going to read this next
Read this
paragraph because I
paragraph,
think
and we'll
it has
stop.
to do that.
I think it's a good wrapping up of the categories, and it kind of gets into thoughts.
Yeah. As I said in my intro, some games straddle the line or don't fit the model. 13th Age is at its core a traditional RPG based on D&D 4e, with some elements of narrative-focused games added in. Alice is Missing combines aspects of a narrative-focused game, a lyric game, and a live-action online game. Bluebeard's Bride is a narrative-focused game that specifically tries to evoke emotions like a lyric game. So,
I would like to know an actual example of what Mike means by a lyric game, since
Yeah.
all the examples here are games that are kind of lyric-y, but not, like when it says like games that are never intended to be played, I'm like, what games are you talking about then?
yeah, the only thing I can think of that's like that are kind of like the journal-type games where you... Like, I've seen a lot of the, like journal-style games where it poses certain questions for you and asks you to take different steps, or based off of whatever you answered on this question.
Okay.
How does that
like
does that
Thousand
thing?
Year Old Vampire, whatever it's called, or
Yeah.
whatever that game's called. Yeah, something
Yeah,
like
yeah, things like that. I'm assuming that's what Mike's going for here.
What
and
would you call a game like The Quiet Year?
I was thinking of Quiet Year when we were talking about the narrative style games, is what I would think, because it has the cards, which are a randomizer, which is indicated. It definitely is trying to set I feel like it's trying to set a feeling if you play it in the most traditional sense, where the end is coming and this is the year before the end happens, and
Yeah.
you know,
It's a good example too of a game where the players aren't necessarily playing as player characters, but are playing as like kind of like smaller GMs.
yeah, exactly.
It's a GM-less game. So.
Yeah. Like that. Now, obviously, it can be used for different things. Not to like advertise for someone who doesn't need our our audience, but the Adventure Zone used it to build up the world that they were then going to play their D&D campaign in, most recently. And that was, of course, a slightly different variant on that, because even though the catastrophe did happen, they survived to go on to the rest of their campaign.
Yeah.
But it definitely feels like it's a game that's designed to evoke loss, which kind of places it, I guess, in the narrative, in the lyric category, but without 100% on there, I would say. Like, you can still have victories.
Yeah.
There was a game I play tested many years ago that was called, I think, The End of Magic. And it was sort of like For the Queen, but you were going from different locations. You were escorting like the last magician somewhere as magic is dying and going out of the world. And it definitely had like...
It's called Children of Magic, and it had Clive Owen in it. There's actually a really cool scene where it's all one shot, so that's kind of cool.
Oh, yeah.
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 Except they cheated and they actually digitally added 2 shots together, and you can kind of tell
Oh,
when it
yeah.
happened.
Sort of like, what was it, 1917?
1917, yeah.
1917? Where it looks like it's one shot, but it's really...
I think it's the same director. I think those are both Alfonso Cuarón, aren't they?
Sure.
I could be wrong. No, I think 17. It doesn't matter. I'm just wrong show for this
Yeah,
topic.
I'm not a movie nerd
1970 is
that
not
way.
Alfonso Cuarón, and someone's gonna be really mad that I said that. So I'm sorry.
But in any case, I mean, I would have liked to have seen what Mike calls a lyric game as well, specifically. I think we have an idea on what that's like. 10 Candles, if you don't know, or Dread might fit into this a little bit, where what it's building is anxiety and
Yeah,
Dread's
Dread's probably a
tension.
good example. Yeah, actually, you should brought that up.
Regardless of what world you're actually playing in, the mechanics itself make you... For anyone who's not familiar, Dread is played with a Jenga tower.
Yeah.
And every time a momentous thing happens, you have to make a move, take a block, and put it on top. And obviously, if you've ever played Jenga before, it gets more and more teetery, and eventually it falls. And when it falls and breaks, that means someone's going to die, or some big thing is going to change or happen in the world. So
Yeah. And I can see why like 10 Candles would fall into that as well, because 10 Candles, like, you're slowly working through candles, you have less candles left each time, so there's less light, and the whole idea is that it's darker and darker and more threatening. So
we're getting some really good comments in chat here about 10 Yankee Candles, Tragicore with a hint of cardamom nut muffin, and 10 Candles Hallmark movie hack, where you start with 0 candles and then you light them as things happen, as good things happen. And yes, it probably was Fall of Magic, the one with the huge map. Yes, that's exactly it. I just couldn't remember what it was called.
I keep threatening to run a 10 candle session of my Doctor Who RPG and call it 10 Torches, and all the players are playing Torchwood agents that are in some like weird place.
Oh, that's
I want
fun.
to do it as a Patreon exclusive, but the problem with it is I want to do it in person because I think 10 Candles is such a more fun game in person.
Oh, yeah.
And our group still isn't comfortable doing all in-person games, so it's like, all right.
I understand.
Yeah.
Well, keep it in the back pocket.
Yeah.
You know.
All right. Are we ready to move on to the
Yeah.
wrap up of this?
I think so. Let's do
I'll
this.
take this over here. These days, this is still Mike's email. These days, I mostly spend my time in story game and OSR circles. My particular interest right now is the intersection and overlap between these movements and the games that have come out of that intersection. My current favorite RPG is Trophy Gold, which is specifically designed to be a hybrid between an OSR RPG and a story game. It's a truly amazing game that really does combine the best elements of both movements. I wish you had told us what about it makes it, like, I don't want to criticize the email. That's mean. I didn't mean to say it that way, but like, I'm curious what I've not knowing this game. I would like to know what about this game for you appeals to those two specific things. Because I think for me, having read that paragraph, I think of trad games as being a combination of OSR and story games. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe but I'm having a hard time visualizing what that actually means as a result of that. Do you have any thoughts about this particular section before we move on, or do you want to?
I was actually just going to look up Trophy Gold because I'm now curious about this game that I've never heard of before.
Yeah. By the way, that's like my gut reaction to hearing combination of OSR and story is like, isn't that just a trad game? I could be way wrong about it. I totally am willing to accept no, this is what makes it different, and this is what's interesting about it. So.
Oh, okay. I have heard of this. I'd forgotten about it. Trophy is a game where you are a doomed treasure hunter, and it's a world of rumor, history, and myth, dark forest, dank caves.
And dank memes.
Yes, you're going to the dank caves for
Yeah.
dank memes.
Yeah.
That's the treasure.
Yeah. The real treasure is the jokes are made along the way. And that 20,000 other people made too.
But
I thought Trophy Gold was the guy who was killed by Doomsday on the path to Metropolis before Superman died.
I thought Trophy Gold, but this might be the same character, the one who came from the future and was a real jackass about it.
Yeah,
Okay,
same character. Yeah, that's a joke. Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
super
I think
into
Booster,
DC.
I think
but yeah.
Booster Gold is killed by Doomsday before Superman is killed by Doomsday. So
Okay, good.
I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I'm actually not a giant DC person either, but it's like one fact that I think I know.
In my canon, that's true because
Yeah.
frankly, he deserves it.
Yeah, why not?
Sorry to any Booster Gold lovers out there. Please keep
Including Booster Gold
keep
himself.
listening and watching.
Yeah.
Friend of the podcast, Booster Gold.
Yeah. Booster Gold, who's going to hear this in the future in the
Oh,
archives,
that's right, yeah.
and then come back in time because of
Yes,
this.
okay.
Yeah. I'll tell you who's Booster.
Remember, I told you that we were going to have a super. We might have a super special guest come in right in the middle. It's going to be
When they were
Booster
killed by
Gold.
superhero Booster Gold. Yeah. So yeah, I guess I can say. I guess like Trophy Gold. Thank you for reading that example because now I kind of visualize a little bit more what's meant about the combination of OSR and story versus what to me like sounded like Trat. So that's good. One question I might hear some people ask is, what about indie RPGs? I don't like that term because it's more about the size of the game publisher than anything about the game itself. In terms of sales, Wizards of the Coast is larger than all other RPG publishers put together, so by that measure, any game that isn't D&D is an indie RPG. That is another topic for another discussion. And I don't want to get too bogged down in that. Obviously, like, D&D is the most known game. We talked about this a little bit before the show. Also, D&D is owned by Hasbro, so it's definitely not. You definitely can't call them indie.
Right.
But I also don't think that the only qualification of what's indie is you're not as big as D&D, because I think that there are smaller game studios that are fully functioning game studios.
I think because we actually did have this discussion before the show for a good 15, 20 minutes,
Probably.
like a good
So-
long
sorry
time
about that.
about
Yeah.
it. And I think that we kind of came to the consensus that the difference between that an indie game / indie game studio has to fall into sort of a matrix, and part of that matrix is where are they getting their money? Like, are they
Yeah.
owned by another company that is, has crazy money and resources that they can give? Is it a small studio where it's just one or two people who are making this out of love and, maybe it'll turn into something great? Or is it someone who has the wherewithal either from Kickstarter or some other personal reserves of wealth that they can hire people and have like a full-time staff who works on a thing?
Yeah.
And to some extent, it also kind of has to do with, in my opinion, has to do with the type of game that it is. But that's not entirely in and of itself the only thing that's a qualifier. I used the example before of Evil Hat, who I no longer consider indie, even though the rules that they use, the fate system, is not traditional in the sense that in the sense that like a Dungeons and Dragons is.
Yeah. And it's like, I think a lot of studios too that are making licensed games for like branded content, I think it's hard to say that company is indie, even if, like you said, they're maybe like not owned by a bigger company. But at the same time, if you're making a game that is literally the like IP of a corporation, it's kind of hard to be like, you're an indie game maker. So maybe I can be wrong, but
Well, like one of the examples that we talked about earlier was Hunter, and Hunter has the IP for Altered Carbon.
Yeah.
But I still wouldn't consider Hunter to be. I would still consider Hunter to be an indie RPG.
okay, that's fair. You know what? I will eat crow
provider.
on that one. You're right about. I think I may, even as I was saying, it, I'm like, that might be true because maybe you scramble enough money together to make a purchase of a
Or
license.
I mean, it just might end up being like who you know. If you have a friend of a friend who owns this cool IP.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking Altered Carbon as much as I was thinking of stuff like the Marvel superheroes RPGs.
Oh, sure,
and
right.
Like Doctor Who. We're playing Cubicle 7. They have the BBC license to make Doctor Who games. I don't know if I would consider Fantasy Flight to be indie when they're making Star Wars. Not anymore, but
Fantasy Flight is definitely, in my opinion, not indie.
yeah. So
I mean, given the breadth and the scope of the games that they make, TTRPGs,
Board
board
games, yeah.
games. Like there's they've got way too much going on.
Yeah, and that was what a lot of we talked about earlier too. Was like if one of your games doesn't do well, if your entire company won't go under, you're probably not an indie. Like whereas like
Right.
yeah, whereas like if you're somebody who is like running a game studio like in like part of your yard and you're running games while you're doing other things, like that might be an indie. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. All right. Should we move? That was that. So Mike says, thank you for taking the time to read and listen to these musings. See you on the Discord, Mike F, New York.
Thank you, Mike F. We kind of gave you a little bit of a hard time here, but we do
Yeah.
appreciate all of your thoughts.
We do, and mostly it's me because I'm mush mouthy and I'm also I have ADHD, so if I make clips, it's mostly so that my brain can keep going through stuff. But obviously, you're very enthusiastic and you have a lot of very interesting and fun perspectives. So thank you for sharing them with us.
All right, I'm going to start email 2.
Cool.
Dear Happy Jack's crew, no, it be my crew now. I'm facing a bit of a dilemma. To preface things, the party is on a quest to help save the commander of an army to make a coalition of drow and orcs, not evil in this setting.
Not a doctor.
This commander, unknown to them, is also secretly a dragon. Now, on the way to the dungeon, they meet a cult of Duergar who seek vengeance on all land dwellers. They promise the group the gift of a magical weapon if they defeat the one down below who keeps killing their members. Now, once down there, they find out that this person is in fact the drow commander that they were sent to save. He is brooding over an artifact of their god, these artifacts being an overarching part of the plot which led to the coalition forming in the first place. Now he identifies the group has a bag of holding and insists that they use it to help him bring his artifact back with him. Instead of helping him, they decide to murder him instead, justifying it by saying he as pushy and aggressive asking for their bag. Justifying it by saying he was pushy and aggressive asking for their bag of holding. Then claiming their prize from the Duergar cult, who is now rampaging on the surface, killing in the name of their evil god. Now, on their return, the group confess to their crime with some good rolls avoided being killed on the spot. Instead, they will be taken to trial. First of all, never confess.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, at this point, this is on your players, because
Yeah.
their players have been like, we were bringing him up, we totally had saved him, and then out of nowhere,
The
this
sugar got him.
oh no, you
Yeah.
know, exactly. Blame
Yeah.
it on the people who are rampaging and get the coalition to follow you.
Yeah.
But in any case, instead they're
Think
taking
about
the
like
trial.
in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade when Sean Connery shoots out the tail end of
Yes.
the plane. Sorry, son, they got us.
They got us.
Yeah.
I think about that scene like once
so
a month
good.
easily.
So good. They got us.
Now, this is the dilemma I'm facing. I'm not sure how to go about the whole thing. In your experience, is the way to punish the group appropriately for their crime without being too harsh and ruining their fun. Your most loyal listener, Zed, from Norfolk, UK. So I think that here's what I think. First of all, I think that a trial can be a really interesting scene in an RPG, especially one like Dungeons and Dragons that mainly focuses on combat.
Yeah.
To have to take that combat into, the court of words and convince people and make arguments, great. I think the first thing I would think is that one thing that you could do if no one feels comfortable doing that is assign them some sort of a DA.
Yeah.
Give them a defender who is going to try and help make their case in front of someone. And, if you're just doing it strictly by roles, has good charisma and persuasion and whatever, so you can kind of give them a chance if they're all, fighters and muggers and thieves.
Yeah. Speaking of other shows and podcasts, I would say that Dungeons and Daddies did a really, really fun trial arc where obviously that plays in the fact that it's a podcast. They were able to kind of like have a guest come on to be the like opposing lawyer and go through it and play things, and then they also like recorded parts of the trial and actually like sent them to people to rule on whether or not they were guilty or not, which is very fun.
Oh, cool.
But I think making a series of skill checks for the trial where based on how strong their argument is, you can be like, okay, you're rolling with advantage or disadvantage for this convince roll, and like you can have a series of skill checks that if you have achieved this level, you might be able to like talk down your sentence, or you might make it worse for yourself, and that
Right.
can be really fun. So that can be a whole session, possibly 2 sessions of fun right there. And then going off of that, I also think that being put in prison is very fun in an RPG setting. Like I've played enough JRPGs where suddenly you get captured and you're usually it's for something that you're not responsible for.
Right.
But you get stuck in an imperial prison or something like that, and you have to then you have to seek out and find your stuff that's in like a chest somewhere. You have to break it to like sneak past guards. Like that can be a fun thing. You can also think of like what their sentence might be. Like you can put them on a prison train if there's trains in this world. You can do all sorts of fun escape from prison things.
it can be a caravan. It can be they're all chained together, sort of thing, a chain gang.
Yeah. Oh my
type
god.
of thing.
How fun would it be to make someone play a whole session where they don't have their weapons and they're all chained to each other, so like they all have to think about like no one can just run off because they'll all come with them.
Right.
Oh my god, that would be so fun. Now I'm going to steal that from one of my games. And then also, if your characters are heroes that are hired for a thing, you can also have some fun punishments that are more like community service type things. And suddenly your characters are. We played a game it was a one-off. It was for Jasper's Game Day this year, where the premise was like kind of a ripoff. It was an inspired, not a ripoff. It was inspired by Schitt's Creek, and the premise was that our characters had destroyed this like town square in our last adventure, and now we had been sentenced by the Adventurers Guild to live in a small town and do a bunch of menial jobs that like our characters were way too OP for, and it was like hilarious. It was so much fun to be like tasked with like helping this girl find her cat or like painting the roof of this building and like that kind of stuff. So I think you can have a lot of fun with that too. So I think lean into crime and punishment, especially if they were already come out of being killed. I think it's really easy to just jump into, okay, you have to do a combat to break out. But instead of making it, a trial can be a whole session. A whole other session can be how do the characters deal with the fallout of their crime. It might even be fun to cut, like it's been like, I don't remember Fable 2, where you end up like working in the Spire and like 10 years of game time have passed and you're still in the Spire and then you come out of it again when everyone's older. It can be like a really funny thing if in your game you have 10 years where you're in this prison and then you come out and you're all ex-cons now.
Well, and also like from just a strict RP standpoint, how do the people's family and friends feel? Do they had to have people who want to try and break them out? Maybe that's a thing.
Yeah.
Maybe what they do is they sentence you to have to do, exile, or you have to do a quest. Since you've killed the leader, you must now go find the next reincarnation of the leader who was just born somewhere.
Yeah.
You got to figure it out. Or maybe now you have to go find the artifact that's going to keep the coalition together to fight off this army of Drugar. Or maybe you get assigned to have to go assassinate their general and their leader since you got our leader killed. Like, there's a lot of different things that you can do that we think are going to be a lot of fun for that. Now, I think what you're concerned about is, it was brought up a little bit in chat, is Stork is famous for not wanting stuff to be taken away from his character. And I know that a lot of people feel like that. But I think that in this case, the story supports it. B, you can be pretty upfront that they're going to get their stuff back or have the opportunity to get their stuff back or get different stuff in these sorts of things. So I don't feel like that's arbitrarily taking someone's stuff away. This is the find out portion of the game because they already had the fuck around part on here. And if they have to play a session or two where they don't have their stuff, that also just increases the creativity quotient here. It becomes well, of course you can pick the lock because you've got lock picks and you've got an 18 dexterity, but now it's, oh look, there's a stick and you were able to steal a fork, so go to work.
Yeah, I definitely understand not wanting to have your stuff taken away from you, but I think making it clear that you're going to get it back or you have the possibility to get it back. And like I said, like there's been plenty of games like a lot of JRPGs where you wake up and suddenly you don't have all your cool stuff, and there's just a chest you find like a few rooms down that has it all in there, but you have to get to that room first and make it happen, make it work, and do a couple of fist fights ahead of time to get there. If you're in a game where people have magic, as long as they have magic spells that don't require material components, they can still cast some spells. I played a game where I had been captured and I was rescued by the party and I didn't have any of my stuff, and so I could only do cantrips for a while because that's the only spells that I could cast that didn't require me to at least have my focus, which I didn't have. I didn't have my wand or whatever it was. So it was a staff. I didn't have my staff. So until I had my staff, I couldn't cast any spells that needed material components. So
I played in a game where I had a spellcaster, and there were things like just what components you can find / make. and like the big thing about being able to find a spider web and now I can cast web.
Yeah.
You know, I only get one shot at it, but that was more than I had 20 minutes ago.
Yeah. It's Gandalf on the roof of Isengard finding that butterfly or the bug that goes by so he can call the eagle to come
Yeah,
down. Like,
yeah,
it's
exactly.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like,
So, and I think that those can lead to really great moments of RP. Now, I know that we're a little off field here because I don't think you're concerned about the RP aspect. You're concerned about how to make this fair in there. One, you get to control the court and the judge and what the ultimate outcome is. Two, they've already admitted to a crime, so it's not like, I just feel like it's not like you're coming out of nowhere and you're just arbitrarily saying, hey, you're all dead now because I said so, because of fiat. Which is also the same about taking stuff away. If you just take stuff away out of fiat, that's different than if you're like, this is the next logical thing that happens as the game is you get locked up and they take away all your stuff.
Yeah.
On there. In terms of being fair, I would, like we always say, talk to your players outside the game and say, look, if you guys end up in jail, are you okay with not having your stuff for a session? Or, you know, do you think that you guys might want to try and escape and just become outlaws now from the law? Like what are your thoughts? How do you feel about these sort of things?
Yeah.
If you ask them what they're ready for, you know, even say, hey guys, death is still technically on the table. You could be found guilty and put to death. How do people feel about that? Some people are going to go, well, that's how the story that's how the story goes because we committed the crime and you know, and did. And some people might be like, absolutely not. I don't want my character to die. But have that conversation with them ahead of time so that you can give them some of the options you're thinking about and some potential consequences, and make sure that no one feels like they were abused or didn't have a chance to fight back or get out of it or anything like that.
Yeah.
But between all of the great things that can spark for roleplay, I think it's a great situation.
Yeah, well, I also going back to kind of what you were saying at the beginning of that, and what they wrote, what Zed wrote here, which is without being too harsh and ruining the fun. How do you punish the group? I think the thing to keep in mind is that the characters are on trial. The characters are going to get punished for the crime. You're not punishing the players. I think that might be the distinction that I think a DM might struggle with sometimes, is like, well, you killed this character, so now you don't get to have a fun role play this week. Like, at the end of the day, the story should still be fun and engaging for everybody involved, whether it's a crime story or if your characters are just heroes who always do the right thing. The story should follow that. So as long as you have player buy-in and they're willing to go into, like you're saying, this fun trial situation, this fun, if you get sentenced to death, like, is there then going to be a possible escape from the gallows, right? Like, is there going to be a Robin Hood type thing where someone shoots the noose while you're tied to it, like the kind of vibe, like,
or an old suspicious guy pushes back a stone and says, "Come with me."
yeah, I found a goat path. Yeah, like there's a bunch of there are ways to do it. I think the big thing is, because I can understand the harsh and ruining the fun, because I think if you have a group of players who we play a murder hobo game, you can't punish us for being murder hobos, and so they might not normally be murder hobos, but yeah, there is sort of a point where it's like, you can't just suddenly decide your world has law and order when it hasn't had it all along.
True.
But if you do, let's do it anyway. That's very fun for us all, and we're all buying into it's still rewarding the players for weird role play with a fun and weird story session.
Now that's being said, we don't know your specific game, so if you're playing by Elfstar rules, and if the character dies in the game, you can no longer associate with the players anymore, then I don't know what to tell you. You need to get off of the chick tracks.
I had a thought and then I just lost it. No.
Well, I'll vamp for a moment. This is me
fine.
vamping.
I think if I don't remember it wasn't worth having it. So.
All right, mailbag 3. Hey folks, been a while since I wrote in, but I figured why not send in some other options which I found to be pretty useful for one-shots. Now, just to clarify, this was regarding masks in particular and PBTA games, just so no one listening or watching is confused. Limit the amount of playbooks offered to players. Ideally, the basic core playbooks, because they can cover pretty much any idea of a character concept. Like Kimmy said, you can cut down on the world creation, so you can probably skip most of the backstory questions and how you first came together, as this can be their first issue. Then I'd say follow the advice of a writer who doesn't deserve to be named, but it's a comic book principle. Every issue should have 2 fights, either physical or emotional. I'm going to admit I don't know who that writer is, but I'm intensely interested now. If they,
Yeah.
I want to know who they are and what they did that they don't deserve to be mentioned.
I've never heard this quote about comic books, but I have heard this quote about running one-shot D&D games. Of like every one-shot should have 2 encounters. So it's either a social encounter or a fight encounter, like a story thing. So
Open in the middle of a superhero fight, just right in the middle. Maybe even open with one of the heroes taking a powerful blow as they just got hit or something, or some building is in danger of falling. It shouldn't be a big fight like the henchman leading to the big bad villain later. The player should be able to help make up the rest of the story with their actions and moves. This may be heresy for some PBTA fans, but I'd say if you really want to save time, make some pre-gens and leave the character names empty. So like pre-written backstory questions, powers, moves, and extras. The extras of each playbook probably won't come up in a one-shot, like the Janus obligations probably won't matter, but every game is different. Either way, love to hear your thoughts on this setup and just hopefully have some fun.
I'm glad.
Jolene.
Yeah, sorry, Jolene. I'm glad that Jolene explained what they meant by the pre-written backstory questions part, because I was like, aren't all playbooks in PBTA pretty much pre-written? Like most of the time, you just circle the stats that are already given to you and you just move on. Like, so. Yeah, I think that's a good way to speed it up. I don't think you necessarily have to cut out the backstory stuff, because I think you can do that in like 5-10 minutes at the most. But I also get, if you're playing at a con, especially when you have a specific limited amount of time, you want to jump right into it, that is a good way to be able to jump right in. So, yeah.
Right. And just like, okay, I would find that something like that is because the names in Mass are generic to be able to cover a whole wide different things. What you might want to do is take a minute and write up an index card with the names of some heroes that sort of match this archetype, so that when I come and sit down at the table, I don't have to figure out what the legacy is, or the kindred or whatever, and I don't remember most of the names of what they are. But the doomed, the powerful, I don't.
Yeah.
I'm flailing here. But what I'm saying is, if you give people a couple of examples, they can come down and they can immediately go, oh, cool. This is a Superman type. This is a Hulk type. This is a Spider-Man type, and get right into how they want to play this. The legacy, right? The legacy is the Boy Wonder.
I think so.
Okay. Sorry,
I'm not up on my masks. It's been a while. I haven't played Mask in like 2 or 3 years.
So. I think you've got a lot of really great ideas. Starting in the middle of a fight is always a fun way to play a game, because it immediately gets everyone invested in the stakes.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of, you get to do that fun record scratch and go, you might be wondering how I got here. And then have everyone do their interactions and the basic thing that led them up to this fight, and then go back into where the fight was. Yeah. And especially Mass, which is kind of irreverent and like that, you could really make that a fun bit, I think.
Even if you don't do it as a flashback, I can think of so many comic books that I've read that just open with a random arbitrary fight that there's no backstory for, and then it ends, and then like something else happens, and you get into it. So it can be a good way to open things up with some action and some fast-paced stuff to like learn your characters really quickly in the heat of battle, and then move on from there.
Right. Yeah. So I think those are some great ways. I can see saving some time just by making some of the decisions about that backstory, but Mass at its core it's less about the superhero fighting and more about the relationships between characters. And I would feel a little bit icky if you write so-and-so has a crush on so-and-so. And then I sit down and I have to play that against somebody.
Yeah.
And if I don't, it feels like I'm not playing the character and I'm missing a part of it. But if I do, it's going to make me feel uncomfortable. I would say maybe leave those blank, or maybe just don't either let people work through that, because like Riley said, it's only going to take a little while for you to do that. And if there's anything that people really don't want, they can kind of, X card it or veil it and just be like, I'm not really into playing romance in this game, so I'm not going to answer that one. Or I'm going to write in an NPC that is
Yeah.
off screen I don't need to worry about.
Yeah, and it goes back to what we talked about last week with the person who had the pre-gens for the Game of Thrones game, and they like made the pre-gen for the person you're a child looking for a spouse, and I was like, no, I don't want to play that. Like, you shouldn't have to be like that limited in what you're playing when you sit down. And I think that part of the fun of a PBTA game, I think, is finding those weird character connections. So I do think that if you took it out entirely, it would maybe be less fun than normally playing a PBTA game for me. Like, I think that's part of the fun of it. Like, most PBTA games I play have been one-shots, and so I'm used to that being part of the one-shot. And I think that asking those questions at the top of the game in a one-shot helps you be able to get into character faster, because now you've got this real quick moment where you've thought about how you all know each other, and now you can get right into the game.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely. So that you don't have to spend... I know that, like, in a regular campaign game, it usually takes me, like, 2 or 3 sessions to find my character's voice.
Yeah.
But if you're going to play a one-shot, you don't have time for that. And the PBTA playbooks have a really good kind of shorthand for me to be like, okay, my character isn't fully fleshed out, but I know that Riley and I got into trouble that one time when we broke into a discotheque. And that can at least inform some of the things. And it gives you something like you can reference in the middle of a combat, like, hey, throw him like you did that disco ball.
Yeah. And again, based on this, like, I wasn't here for the original conversation this was in response to, so I don't know 100% the context of what this setting is. And I think there's a difference between playing a one-shot where you and your friends have agreed that on Friday we're going to get together and play masks, versus I have signed up for a mask session at a con. Because in one situation, you are going to have a chance to have at least some conversation ahead of time. So you could have like a text thread or an email chain going on to get some of those like character things out of the way, so that when you get to the table, you're ready to just jump in and go. Whereas at a con, you might not have that. And that's why I think you especially need to have those conversations about character dynamics ahead of time at the con before you start playing, because you might be playing with total strangers. And so, like I say, it might be very hard to be like, oh, me, like if I sat down, like, okay, Nick and I, our characters are married. You're like, wait, we didn't talk about that. I don't like playing that. Yeah. So we're reading Sue Richards. Like I came to play the thing. Like, what are you talking about? Like,
right.
So.
Well, I think that I think we're going to wrap it up there. We're going a little bit long. I personally like the really long episodes of the show, but I know I'm in the minority there.
Well,
and
I mean,
and it also
when you
comes
have a
it also comes from a
three-page
time where
email, I mean, it's hard not to be long at that point. And
it also comes from a time where I had like 8 to 10 hours a day that I had to fill with something, so the long ones were great for me. But in any case, I just want to thank you all for joining us for session 30, episode 20. Thank you to our chat mod, James V, and our amazing Patreons who keep us free and independent. I'm Nick.
I'm Riley.
And remember, Strategicon is coming up September 2nd to 4th, and we'd love to see you there if that is in any way possible for you. Now we're going to go ahead and leave you with a song. This is Prick a Holly Bush, which is a traditional song, and it's done by the very own Merry Wives of Windsor, official sponsors of Kimmy's Studio for Happy Jacks. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.
And if ever I get out of the prickle holly bush, I'll never go in there anymore.
Come slack your horse, cries Joan. Come slack it for a while. For I think I see my father dear riding over yonder stile. Did you bring gold? Did you bring silver to set me free? Or to save my body from the cold jail walls and my neck from the high gallows tree? I've no gold, I've no silver to set you free. For I have come for to see thee hang along the high gallows tree.
Oh, the prickle holly bush, it breaks, it breaks, it breaks my heart full sore. And if ever I get out of the prickle holly bush, I'll never go in there anymore.
Come slack your horse, cries Joan.
Come slack it for a while, for I think I see my sister dear riding over yonder stile.
Did you bring gold?
Did you bring silver to set me free, or to save my body from the cold jail walls and my neck from the high gallows tree?
I've no gold,
I've no silver save my body from the cold jail walls and my neck from the high gallows tree. I brought gold, I brought silver to set you free, for I've not come to see thee hang all on the high gallows tree. Oh, the prickle holly bush, it breaks my heart full sore. And now that I'm out of the prickle holly bush, I'll never go in there anymore. Oh, the prickle holly bush, it breaks